There's an old saying that goes, never mistake silence for surrender. That line could have been written for Andrea Peña. By the spring of 2024, Andrea was 62 years old and had learned how to make herself small in her daughter's world. She had the kind of presence you almost forget is in the room: soft voice, gentle eyes, hands that never stopped working. Her daughter Madeline Roberts liked things quiet and perfect, and Andrea had learned to blend into the backdrop like the floral wallpaper she'd once picked out herself. That Saturday afternoon in Santa Barbara, the sky was pure gold, the kind that turns every glass surface into a mirror. Madeline's backyard was filled with her colleagues, young professionals in crisp linen, holding stemmed glasses of Sauvignon Blanc. Laughter floated above the trimmed hedges, the kind of laughter that sounds harmless until you realize you're the reason it started. Inside the kitchen, Andrea was pulling a tray of buttery shortbread cookies from the oven. The scent filled the house like a memory. She had made the same batch for every birthday, graduation, and Sunday dinner since Madeline was a little girl who scraped her knees and ran to her mother crying for hugs and sweets. Those days were gone now. The hugs had turned into curt nods, the sweets into expectations. Andrea wiped her hands on her apron, lifted the tray, and carried it out to the patio. Her joints ached, but her smile stayed polite. "Cookies, everyone," she said softly. The group turned toward her. Some smiled out of manners, others didn't bother. She offered the tray to one woman, a tall brunette with polished nails, who took a piece and murmured, "These are delicious." That was when Madeline laughed. "Oh, she just kind of stays here," she said, waving her manicured hand toward her mother like she was pointing out a decorative lamp. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp, uncomfortable. A handful of people chuckled, others looked down at their drinks. No one spoke. Even Wesley, her son-in-law, avoided Andrea's eyes, pretending to check his phone. Andrea stood still, tray trembling slightly. The warmth from the cookies pressed into her palms. She felt the sting in her chest, not just from the words, but from the familiarity of them, how practiced that tone had become. She nodded faintly, turned back toward the house, and disappeared inside. From the kitchen window, she could still hear the laughter spilling into the evening air. It mixed with the sound of clinking glasses, and the faint hum of a portable speaker playing something upbeat, music for people who didn't know what guilt sounded like. Andrea placed the tray on the counter, and stared at it for a long time. The cookies looked perfect. Golden edges, sugared tops. She wondered if her mother would have said something back, if her late husband Conrad Peña would have spoken up. Conrad had been the kind of man who found beauty in what others overlooked. "You keep the light on in this house," he used to tell her. Now, standing under that same kitchen light, Andrea realized that her glow had been dimmed by years of swallowing hurt. The night dragged on with the sound of laughter thinning, then fading entirely. When the guests left, she began to clean. She moved like muscle memory, collecting glasses, folding napkins, wiping away fingerprints from the countertop. Each motion became a ritual of containment, her way of holding together what little self-respect the night had left her. Wesley passed behind her, his voice low and awkward. "Thanks, Andrea," he mumbled before heading upstairs. Not Mom, not even mother-in-law, just Andrea. When the house grew still, she leaned her weight on the counter and whispered under her breath, "Maybe it's time I remember whose house this really is." Her reflection stared back at her from the polished granite, soft lines, tired eyes, silver strands of hair that used to be dark and full. She wasn't angry yet. Anger came later. For now there was only the hollow sound of realization, that she had raised a woman who could humiliate her in her own kitchen and feel nothing about it. Andrea walked to the window and looked out at the garden she'd planted behind the house, rows of rosemary, daisies, and lavender. She could still see the small stone bird bath she'd bought from a thrift store years ago, back when she and Conrad lived in their old Victorian on Palm Avenue. That garden had been their sanctuary, the same one where they taught Madeline how to pull weeds, how to plant seeds, how to wait for things to bloom. Andrea smiled bitterly. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had taught her daughter how to grow things, and somewhere along the way, she had raised someone who believed that flowers only bloomed for her. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. The clock ticked toward midnight. Andrea rinsed the last glass, dried her hands, and reached into her apron pocket for her rosary beads, tiny wooden ones her husband had bought her in Carmel years ago. Her fingers lingered on them. Outside, the party lights flickered off one by one. She turned away from the window, whispering to herself again, but this time the words had more weight. Maybe it's time I stop staying quiet. As she made her way to her small guest room, the one tucked behind the laundry area, the room that smelled faintly of detergent and lemon oil, she closed the door behind her, locked it and sat on the edge of the bed. The humiliation had done something that years of patience hadn't. It had awakened something. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would bake again, but not cookies, not apologies. Something else entirely. Something that would feed only her. And upstairs, while Madeline slept in silk sheets and dreamt of her spotless, enviable life, Andrea Pena lay awake in the dark, remembering every word from that party. Every glance, every small betrayal. She didn't yet know what she would do. But she knew this much: the story wasn't over. It had only just begun. There's a sound that never leaves you once you've heard it. The sound of glass shattering on tile. It was mid-morning when it happened. The kind of quiet Sunday where light filters through blinds in soft stripes, where the world feels still enough to breathe. Andrea Pena stood in the kitchen, waiting for her tea kettle to whistle. She'd been up since dawn. Old habits don't die, they just shift schedules. She reached for a mug from the cupboard, and that's when her elbow brushed against a tall glass on the drying rack. It fell in slow motion, spinning once before it hit the floor. The sound was sharp, piercing, followed by the delicate patter of fragments, scattering across the white tile. "Damn it," she muttered softly, crouching to pick up the pieces. The kettle began to hiss, and as if on cue, heels clicked sharply down the hall. Madeline appeared in the doorway, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her workout clothes spotless. Her tone hit before her eyes even settled on the scene. "What did you do now?" Andrea froze. "I dropped a glass, honey. I'll clean it up." "Of course you will," Madeline said, arms crossed. "You're always dropping something." Wesley's voice drifted faintly from the upstairs landing, half asleep and unconcerned. "Everything okay down there?" "Fine," she called back sweetly. "Mom's just redecorating with broken glass again." Andrea winced. Her daughter's words carried that kind of humor that's designed to sting. She picked up another shard, blood glinting where it nicked her finger. "I'm sorry," Andrea whispered. Madeline raised a hand to cut her off. "You should know your place." The words didn't make sense at first. They hung in the air, heavy, foreign, wrong. "My place." Andrea repeated quietly. "Yes," Madeline said, stepping closer. "This isn't your house. You don't get to just do whatever you want here." Andrea blinked, startled. "Madeline, I've done everything for this house. I clean, I cook. Madeline's voice rose. "And no one asked you to. You think scrubbing counters earns you rent. You think making cookies excuses you from being a guest." "A guest," Andrea said, her voice trembling. "I'm your mother." For a second something flickered across Madeline's face. Recognition, guilt maybe, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Her phone was already in her hand. "Not anymore," she said flatly. "If you don't get out, I'll call the cops." Andrea stood there, barefoot on cold tile, surrounded by broken glass that sparkled like tiny mirrors. In each reflection she could see it, her own shock, her own shame. "You wouldn't," Andrea whispered. Madeline's thumb pressed the screen. A dial tone filled the silence. "I'm serious, Mom. You can't just stay here. This is my house. Mine and Wesley's." Andrea's throat tightened. Her voice came out small, but steady. "No, it was mine before it was ever yours." Madeline rolled her eyes. "Don't start this again. You signed it over years ago." Andrea's eyes narrowed slightly. "No, I didn't." For a moment they just stood there. Mother and daughter, years of unspoken resentment pulsing between them like static. The kettle screamed. The phone kept ringing. Andrea looked around the kitchen. The marble counters she had helped pick. The backsplash she'd paid for when Madeline couldn't afford the remodel. Every inch of it carried her fingerprints. Every bill, every hour, every memory. And yet here she was, being treated like an intruder in her own legacy. Madeline's voice broke through. "I swear, if you don't pack your things by tonight, I'll have the police remove you myself." Andrea took a deep breath, and did something unexpected. She smiled. Just barely. But it was there. "Then I'll make it easy for you," she said quietly. Madeline frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Andrea didn't answer. She turned toward the window, where her garden bloomed under the morning sun. Lavender, mint, rosemary. The same herbs she'd planted the first year she moved in. The same ones her daughter once helped water with a plastic cup and tiny hands. Now those hands gripped a phone, ready to erase her. Andrea picked up her tea mug, ignoring the sting from her cut finger. "You know," she said softly, her voice almost kind. "I used to think you were like your father. Turns out, you're not even like me." She walked out of the kitchen, leaving her daughter standing there, the phone still pressed to her ear. Outside, the garden swayed gently in the breeze. Andrea stepped barefoot onto the patio, the sunlight catching her silver hair. She took in the scent of mint and wet earth, her small kingdom. The realization settled slowly, then completely this wasn't her home anymore, but it was still her house. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and exhaled with something she hadn't felt in years. Clarity. Inside, Madeline's voice could be heard faintly, arguing with someone on the phone, trying to explain the situation as complicated. Andrea didn't bother listening. Instead, she whispered, "If you think you can throw me out, you've forgotten who built the walls you're standing in." She didn't say another word, but something inside her had shifted. Not rage, not sorrow, just resolve. That evening, after Madeline and Wesley left for a dinner party, Andrea went to her small guest room. She opened the top drawer of her dresser and pulled out a small metal box. Inside were documents, carefully folded and still crisp: the property deed, marriage certificate, Conrad's death certificate, and a faded photograph of a young couple holding a baby in front of a rundown Victorian home. She ran her hand over the deed, her name written cleanly across it, Andrea Pena. Her lips curved into a quiet smile. She whispered, "You want me out of your house? Fine. But first I'll remind you whose name is on it." She placed the papers neatly into a folder and set them on the bed. The plan hadn't formed yet, but the seed had been planted, right there, among the broken glass and rosemary leaves. Tomorrow the world would still see a soft-spoken widow. But the woman beneath that softness had just remembered something important. Silence was never weakness. It was patience, sharpening its blade. By Monday morning the Pena house felt like a museum. Spotless, still, and cold. Andrea Pena moved through the kitchen like a ghost, setting out coffee cups no one would drink from. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that dared to exist between her and her daughter now. For 2 days, not a single word had been exchanged. Madeline Roberts had perfected the art of avoidance. Headphones in, conversations clipped, glances sharp enough to slice through any attempt at peace. Her husband Wesley pretended not to notice the tension that coiled through every room. He left earlier than usual for work and came home late, muttering excuses about extra clients and late calls. Andrea didn't mind the quiet. She had plans to make. That evening, while folding laundry in the guest room, she heard her daughter's heels approaching. A rhythm she had come to recognize, like a weather warning. Madeline appeared in the doorway, holding a sleek brown folder. "Mom," she began, voice syrup sweet. "I need a small favor." Andrea didn't look up. "What kind of favor?" Madeline stepped into the room and set the folder down on the bed. "It's about the house on Palm Avenue. You know, the one you and Dad bought years ago. I was talking to my accountant, and apparently it would make things easier for everyone if the deed was under my name. You know, tax benefits, refinancing options, that sort of thing." Andrea's hands stopped moving. "Under your name?" she asked quietly. Madeline smiled. The kind of smile people wear when they've already decided you'll agree. "It's just paperwork, really. Nothing changes for you. You'd still get the rent income. I'd just be the listed owner. It's practical." Andrea met her daughter's gaze for the first time that day. "Practical for whom?" The smile faltered. "For both of us," Madeline said, shifting her weight. "Walter, the notary I know, can stamp it tomorrow. You just have to sign right here." She flipped open the folder and revealed a set of forms, crisp and ready, her pen already uncapped. Andrea took her time. She leaned forward, her old reading glasses hanging low on her nose, and glanced over the first page. She saw her own name typed neatly, then crossed out in blue ink, replaced with Madeline Roberts. The room went still. Andrea closed the folder gently. "No." Madeline blinked. "What?" "I said no." Her daughter's lips parted, disbelief flickering across her face. "You don't even know what you're refusing. I know exactly what you're asking for." Andrea said, voice calm, almost tender. And you can leave now. For a moment neither spoke, then Madeline huffed, snatched the folder off the bed, and muttered, fine, be difficult. Her heels clicked away. 3 days later, Andrea got a call from First Pacific Bank. The woman on the line spoke gently, but her words landed like punches. Pina, we just wanted to confirm your mortgage application for a home equity line of credit. We noticed some inconsistencies with the ownership records. Andrea's brow furrowed. Mortgage application. I didn't apply for any loan. A pause. Then the representative's tone shifted. Oh, that's concerning. That's concerning. The paperwork lists your daughter, Mrs. Roberts, as the primary owner. It's missing your signature, but her name is on all of the forms. Andrea's heart thudded. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped the phone. Could you email me copies of those documents? Of course, the woman said. You'll have them within the hour. When the email arrived, Andrea opened it with trembling fingers. There it was. Her daughter's handwriting. Her signature forged in perfect imitation. The lie was complete. The betrayal was whole. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then slowly, she began to breathe differently. Measured, deliberate, unafraid. The time for silence had ended. That night, while the house slept, Andrea moved with purpose. She retrieved the small leather suitcase she hadn't touched in years. Inside, she placed 4 things. Her marriage certificate, Conrad's death certificate, the original house deed, and a photo of the 3 of them taken the day they bought the Victorian on Palm Avenue. In it, her husband's arm was draped around her, their young daughter grinning toothlessly at the camera. Andrea ran her thumb over that photo, her heart both breaking and hardening. At 3:07 a.m., she zipped the suitcase shut. She dressed in a soft gray cardigan, laced her shoes, and paused one last time at the threshold of her small room. Everything in it felt temporary now. The bed she'd paid for, the lamp she'd bought, the quiet she'd been forced into. She walked down the hall, her footsteps muffled against the carpet. She stopped by the kitchen and took a scrap of paper from the notepad by the fridge. She wrote only one line. When my own daughter threatened to call the police, I called the realtor instead. She left the note under a porcelain teapot, the one her daughter never used. Then she stepped out into the cool night air, her suitcase rolling softly behind her. The street was silent, her heart wasn't. She didn't look back. By morning, Andrea sat in the sunlit office of Walter Gage, her late husband's old friend and retired attorney. His silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights as he flipped through the papers she laid before him. Legally, he said, this house is still yours. Your daughter doesn't have a single claim on it, not one. Andrea nodded. Then I want to sell it. Walter looked up, surprised. Sell it? Are you sure? I'm done renting the past, she said simply. It's time I buy my piece. He gave a slow nod. Then you'll need a realtor. Andrea smiled faintly. I already know one. She pulled a small business card from her purse. Rachel Wolfe Realty, a name she'd kept tucked away for months, just in case her instincts ever proved right. Call her, she said. Today. Nicholas. That afternoon, Andrea sat in the waiting room of a small lavender-painted real estate office, hands clasped, eyes steady. Rachel Wolfe greeted her with a bright, genuine smile. I remember you, Rachel said warmly. You used to come into the library with your daughter when I was little. Andrea returned the smile, the first true one in weeks. Yes, she said softly. And now I need you to help me do something. Quiet. Rachel tilted her head. Quiet. Andrea nodded. Sell a house. By dawn the decision was sealed tighter than the deed in Andrea's folder. For the first time in years she woke up without the dull ache of obligation pressing on her chest. She'd left behind the home that had turned her into a servant, and for the first time in months, she could breathe without permission. The motel room smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee, but Andrea didn't mind. She sat by the small round table, sipping from a paper cup as the city yawned awake outside. Her phone lay face down, screen dark. She hadn't turned it on since she left. At 9 sharp, Rachel Wolfe called. Mrs. Pena, she said, with a smile in her voice. I'm ready when you are. Andrea met her at the Victorian house on Palm Avenue, the home she and her late husband Conrad Pena had built from nothing. The paint had faded over time, the porch railings leaned slightly, but to Andrea it still looked noble, like a soldier who'd survived every war. Rachel walked around the perimeter, notebook in hand. "It's beautiful," she said. Admiration soft but real. "Homes like this don't come around often." Andrea smiled faintly. It was built with calloused hands and good faith, but faith can't fix what family breaks. Rachel looked at her curiously, but didn't ask. She understood when silence carried more truth than a story could. They stepped inside, and as Andrea watched the young woman photograph the living room, the old fireplace, the garden visible through the kitchen window, something in her steadied. This wasn't just a listing, it was liberation. Rachel returned to her desk by late morning and sent the files to her broker. Andrea waited in the car, watching the house through the windshield. A dozen memories floated through her mind. Conrad on a ladder painting the eaves, little Madeline barefoot in the garden, herself humming as she pressed curtains into place. All of it belonged to time now, not to her daughter, not anymore. At 8:14 a.m., the listing went live. A quaint 3-bedroom Victorian on Palm Avenue, mature garden, solid foundation. Ownership since 1983. Rachel called less than 2 hours later. "You're not going to believe this," she said. 3 inquiries already. 2 are cash buyers. The market's hot, and this house has soul. Andrea's eyes flickered. "Show it, quietly. No open houses. I don't want anyone in that family knowing yet." Rachel hesitated. Discretion. Got it. My noon. The first buyer, a young tech entrepreneur from San Francisco, called in an offer. Full price. Sight unseen. He wanted a retreat from the noise of the world. The second came from 2 sisters who flipped historical homes. Their offer came with charm and enthusiasm. They even wrote a note about how the home deserved love again. The third came from a woman named Michelle Vargas, 54 years old, recently divorced, looking for somewhere to start over. Her voice trembled when she spoke to Rachel on the phone. "I lost my home after my husband passed. I want roots again, not luxury, just peace." Rachel relayed every detail. Andrea listened quietly, then said, "Her. Sell it to her." Rachel blinked. She offered a little less. "I don't care." Andrea interrupted. "She sounds like she'll take care of it." Rachel smiled. Understood. By 4:17 p.m., the sale was agreed upon. Michelle's funds were verified, the contract drawn, and the title transfer initiated. All Andrea had to do was sign. She sat in the motel room again, pen in hand, staring at the dotted line, her pulse steadied. She pressed the pen to paper. The sound of ink scratching across the page was softer than a whisper, yet it roared louder than every insult she'd swallowed. When she finished, she exhaled slowly and whispered,
"You called the cops."
"Madeline." "I called the realtor."
"And Toos."
"Matt." At 6:45 p.m. "Matt." As the California sun sank low, the courier knocked on the Roberts' front door. Wesley answered, confused, holding a half-empty tumbler of bourbon. "Yes? Delivery for Mrs. Roberts," the man said, handing over a thick sealed envelope, certified. Inside were the documents: notice of ownership transfer, termination of tenancy 7 days, and at the bottom of the page, in firm black ink, signed by Andrea Pena. Madeline read it twice, before she understood. Her breath caught. No. This can't be right," she muttered, grabbing her phone. She dialed her mother's number. It rang, and rang.
No answer.
She called again, straight to voicemail. Within an hour, 6 missed calls filled Andrea's phone. The 7th came from Wesley. He didn't leave a message. By nightfall, Andrea had moved into a small suite downtown. She sat by the window, city lights stretching across the horizon like a promise. Her phone buzzed again. Madeline. She flipped it over, screen down. The next morning, Rachel called to confirm. "Transfer is complete. Funds are in your account." "Shh, it's done." "Shh." Andrea smiled faintly. "Good. Now send the new owner the keys." My Wednesday, the whispers began. Neighbors slowed their cars when passing the Roberts house. The story spread the way gossip always does, in pieces, in tones both sympathetic and scandalous. "Did you hear? She sold the house from under her own daughter." "No, she didn't. The daughter forged documents. Either way, she's getting evicted next week. Imagine being thrown out of your mother's house. Shameful." The following Saturday, Andrea sat at a small cafe across the street, watching the movers carry boxes out of the house that once held her laughter. Madeline stood in the driveway wearing oversized sunglasses, her face tight and drawn. The neighbors watched from porches and sidewalks, pretending to water plants or check mail. Humiliation hung thick in the air. Even Wesley's silence spoke volumes. He refused to help pack, his arms crossed, jaw clenched. When Madeline tried to hand him a box, he shook his head. "I'm staying at my mother's," he said flatly. "I didn't sign up for this mess." Madeline's lips trembled. "Wesley, please." He turned away, got into his car, and drove off without another word. Shh. Andrea didn't move from her cafe seat. She just stirred her coffee, watching the reflection of her daughter standing there, alone in front of the home she once tried to claim. The balance had shifted. The humiliation had come full circle. And yet Andrea didn't feel triumphant. Only still. At night, back in her apartment, she opened the window to let the evening breeze in. She brewed mint tea, the kind Conrad used to love, and watched the lights of the city shimmer below. The phone rang again. Madeline, Andrea. Andrea stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Then she whispered to herself, "Silence was my revenge. But peace is my reward." She took a slow sip and smiled faintly. The next act would not be about anger. It would be about closure. It was almost poetic how life came full circle for Andrea Pena. A week after the sale, the city air smelled of freedom and rain. From the 24th floor of her new apartment on Laurel Street, she could see everything: traffic moving like veins of light, people crossing intersections like living stories, and the ocean glinting faintly in the distance. The apartment wasn't grand, but it was hers, paid in full, not borrowed, not begged for, not shared. For the first time in over a decade, Andrea had a space untouched by anyone's temper or expectations. On the small balcony, she'd set up a table with a mint plant in a clay pot, the same mint she'd once grown behind her old house, the same herb her late husband Conrad used to crush between his fingers before adding it to her tea. Now it was her ritual. Each night, she brewed mint and chamomile, leaned against the balcony rail, and let the hum of the city drown out everything that came before. But peace has a way of testing itself, and that test arrived in the form of a buzz at the intercom around 9:07 p.m. Andrea glanced at the monitor. There, standing beneath the streetlight, hair undone, mascara streaked, was Madeline Roberts. Her once impeccable posture was gone. She looked smaller now, wrapped in a thin coat, clutching a duffel bag, eyes swollen and frantic. The intercom crackled. "Mom, please." Andrea didn't move. She only listened. "Please let me in," Madeline's voice broke. "Just for a night. I have nowhere to go." Wesley left. The new owner changed the locks. "I just need a place to sleep." The words came out in gasps, half choked by regret. "I didn't mean what I said. I was angry." "You didn't deserve that. Please." Andrea's fingers hovered above the button that would unlock the gate. She could almost hear Conrad's voice in her head. "You're too kind, Annie. Even after they hurt you." She wasn't angry anymore. That feeling had passed somewhere between the sale closing and the movers hauling her daughter's furniture into the street. What remained now wasn't bitterness. It was understanding. Madeline hadn't just lost a house. She had lost the illusion of control that arrogance had built for her. Andrea pressed the intercom button gently. Her voice came out calm, steady, and heartbreakingly firm. "You called the police, remember? I called the Realtor. And now, you've called me." Madeline looked up toward the building, scanning the rows of balconies until her eyes found her mother's figure above. Andrea stepped into the light. Their eyes met, one pair red from crying, the other clear with quiet strength. "Don't ever think you can trick an old woman," Andrea said softly, her voice carrying through the cool air. "Especially your own mother." Twice. Madeline's chin quivered. "I just need time, Mom. Just please." Andrea took a long breath. The city noise filled the silence between them. Horns, wind, distant music. She thought of every night she'd gone to bed in her daughter's house, heart heavy from words unsaid. Every time she'd been spoken over, dismissed, treated like a relic. Every dish she'd washed without thanks. Every insult she'd absorbed quietly, just to keep peace. She'd done her time in silence. Now silence belonged to her. Andrea didn't answer. She simply set her cup of tea on the balcony rail and turned away. The intercom buzzed again, this time longer, more desperate. "Mom, I'm sorry." Madeline cried out, her voice echoing up the building. You win? Okay? You win. Andrea paused by the glass door. She didn't look back. This was never about winning, she murmured, too quietly for her daughter to hear. It was about remembering who I was before you forgot. Then she stepped inside and drew the curtain closed. Outside, the streetlight flickered. The young woman on the sidewalk sank to her knees, face buried in her hands. Cars passed by, their headlights washing over her like fading spotlights. No one stopped. Knee inside, Andrea moved slowly through her apartment. The wooden floors glowed beneath the lamplight, her new world still smelling faintly of paint and possibility. She picked up the teapot and refilled her cup. Steam rose, curling like smoke from a distant fire finally extinguished. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her daughter this time. I'll do better, Mom. I promise. Please call me. Andrea typed 3 words in reply, then deleted them. She set the phone face down. Ni and das. As the night deepened, Andrea opened the balcony door again. The city air swept in, cool and alive. Below her, people laughed in the distance. The kind of laughter that no longer cut her. She leaned against the railing, the mint leaves brushing her wrist, and whispered a final thought meant for herself, and for anyone listening who had ever been silenced by those they loved. Silence isn't weakness. It's memory sharpening its blade. Her eyes softened. You can build a home out of forgiveness, she added quietly, but you don't have to live in it forever. The city lights shimmered back at her, as if agreeing. She closed her eyes and took a slow sip of tea. The bitterness was gone. Only warmth remained. Somewhere below, footsteps faded. The desperate knocking had stopped. The story of Andrea Peña and her daughter would be retold by neighbors, twisted by gossip, and embellished by strangers. But the truth was simpler. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance. The kind a quiet woman reclaims, when she finally stops asking for a seat at her own table and builds her own. As dawn approached, Andrea stood by the balcony, watching the horizon blush pink over the city, and for the first time since she could remember, she smiled, not for anyone watching, not for forgiveness or validation. She smiled because peace had a sound after all. It sounded like silence,